Our speaker today is Steph Herbstritt. She's a PhD student in agricultural and biological engineering at Penn State, working with Tom Richard, who's the director for the Institutes of Energy and the Environment. She's working on the synergies between farm profitability, sustainable energy, and environmental quality. Steph previously completed her master's degree in ABE at the University of Illinois and worked as an environmental consultant and as a hydrologist for the Susquehanna River Basin Commission. When she's not working, you'll find her outside or implementing new projects on her home farm. Today, she'll be leading us with a conversation entitled Waste to Worth, a case study of the renewable natural gas circular economy in Pennsylvania. Steph, the floor is yours.
Great, I'll share my screen. And I'm going to turn off my video because my internet is terrible, but I'll turn it back on at the end.
We can see it.
Great. Well, thanks for that wonderful introduction. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. Today, I'm in Center County, Pennsylvania, shown here under this house on the map. This is the traditional land of the Susquehannock peoples, and the water that runs off the land I'm on today drains south to the Chesapeake Bay. A few quick fun facts about Pennsylvania. We are in the northeastern United States, and parts of our state are in peak foliage right now. That's when the leaves look the best. We're known for our abundant energy resources. The first US commercial oil well was drilled in Pennsylvania, kind of fun. We're second in the nation in nuclear power generating capacity. We're actually we're the third largest net supplier of energy to other states. We're second only to Texas in fossil natural gas reserves. Those actually quadrupled over about the past decade because of development in the Marcellus Shale. We're the third largest producer of electricity in the US. Only Texas and Florida generate more. I'm proud of our state. We only get 5% of our energy from renewables, but we rank 9th among US states for methane production from biogas sources. And today we're focusing on a case study of the biogas circular economy in Pennsylvania and how that can contribute to the circularity in food and agricultural systems. And as Chuck pointed out, the theme of this webinar series has been on transitioning current food and agricultural systems from systems that rely heavily on importing inputs to produce food, and in the process of producing food, produce waste and contribute to environmental degradation, into circular systems that design out waste, keep materials in use in the system, regenerate natural ecosystems, provide economic benefits, and ensure viability and resilience of Earth's ecosystems. And by the end of our time together today, I want you to take away an example of how a well-managed, engineered bioenergy system like anaerobic digestion may help us improve the circularity of our food system to help us meet some of those grand challenges we face that Jim Jones shared in his presentation at the beginning of this series, like meeting food demand of a growing population with limited and declining resources under more intense weather and in ways that contribute positively to people and planet. So let's start with the basics so we're all on the same page. Anaerobic digestion is an engineered biological system. It starts with bacterial hydrolysis of biomass. Bacteria break down carbohydrates into soluble organic molecules. Acidogenic bacteria then convert these molecules into hydrogen, carbon dioxide, ammonia, ammonium, hydrogen sulfide, and organic acids. And in acetogenesis, bacteria convert organic acids into acetic acid, along with additional ammonia, hydrogen, and carbon dioxide. And then finally, methanogens take over and they convert these products to biogas, which is a combination of methane, about 60% methane, and carbon dioxide. It's about 40% carbon dioxide. And we're engineers, so here's another flow chart, just for fun. In addition to producing biogas from agricultural crops and waste, thereby keeping them in the system, In an anaerobic digestion system, we can improve circularity with the nutrient-rich solid and liquid byproduct of the digestion process. So that digestate that's produced can be used as a concentrated soil amendment, and that can help regenerate natural ecosystems. The residue, that digestate, retains almost all of the original nitrogen from, say, manure, if that's what's going in the form of ammonium, and then all of the phosphorus. And depending on the feedstock and the conversion rate and all of these other things, generally the digestate retains about 30% of the carbon. So let's go back to our first flow chart. So we can note two important pieces here. So number one, the easily degradable carbon coming into the system ends up in the biogas. The rest ends up in the leftover digestate. And that carbon's more stable than the characteristics of the manure, for example, going into the system. All of the protein nitrogen gets converted to ammonium. So when we put manure in the system, just as an example, which has nitrogen in inorganic and in organic end forms, we end up with a better fertilizer at the end of this process, the liquid digestate. So those are two really important points I want you to keep in mind. Back to the system, there are a few options for using biogas. First, not shown here, biogas can be flared or combusted directly on farms. It can also be used in combined heat and power. The methane can be upgraded into biomethane, also known as renewable natural gas or RNG, and put into the existing natural gas grid, like fossil natural gases. Or it can be converted into electricity and used directly on farms or sold to the electric grid. And then the carbon dioxide stream in biogas can also be separated and used in industrial applications, or it could be stored in geologic formations, and that's permanent storage. So this photo shows an example of a well-managed anaerobic digestion system. This was taken by one of our colleagues, Emilio, at their farm in Italy. The digesters are covered, you'll notice, to prevent methane leakage. And we have data that suggests even if 3% of the methane leaks from these systems because of the high global warming potential of methane, the carbon benefits of these engineered systems would be almost negated. So controlling leakage is really important. And under a circular economy, we can't have that. We want to ensure the viability and resilience of Earth's ecosystems. So we know atmospheric CO2 is rapidly rising. Biogas and biomethane can reduce greenhouse gas emissions in a few ways. So number one, renewable natural gas is considered a cleaner burning fuel. It's identical to fossil natural gas. It's cleaner than burning diesel. Methane has a higher global warming potential than CO2. So I think this is a really important point, this methane capture and use. The methane offsets in capturing manure and other wastes like food waste can offset greenhouse gas emissions. So by capturing that waste that would otherwise have emitted potent emissions to the atmosphere, we can turn it into a beneficial use. And in doing so, we're offsetting greenhouse gas emissions. And then probably most notably is number three, we could remove carbon from the atmosphere through carbon sequestration. And that was discussed in depth during this presentation series last time. And this is really a future opportunity. It's happening, but this is more like future. And it's interestingly, when this is in place, the carbon benefits double for these systems. But it's not in a way that's circular because CO2 is permanently removed. So I kind of like to say, maybe sometimes we don't want circularity. Okay, so when plants are used as the feed going into digesters, the system is removing carbon from the atmosphere through photosynthesis. So this graph shows the annual terrestrial and fossil carbon fluxes in gigatons carbon per year. And from this, you can see that gross photosynthesis on the far left dwarfs fossil emissions. So gross photosynthesis is about 100 gigatons per year, whereas fossil emissions are emitting about 10. So this looks great, but this carbon negative relationship is actually offset by plant respiration and fires. So if we can increase gross photosynthesis by say 5%, then maybe we could balance the annual carbon flux. But atmospheric CO2 is rapidly rising. Most of you have probably seen this or similar graphs showing the increase in CO2 concentration in the atmosphere over the past hundreds of years. And the net flux of that on an annual basis looks like this. So plants are removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere during the summer. You can see the CO2 concentration is going down when plants are growing around June and July and August into September. And then that's released in the winter as crop residues, et cetera, break down. So we could reduce respiration by doing things like getting crop residues into formats that enhance soil organic carbon sequestration, but anaerobic digestion can also do that. And mostly because of the methane offsets, engineered anaerobic digestion systems are actually 3 to 5 times better than solar or wind. So you can get this 300 to 500% reduction in emissions. So that image, I think, is a good transition to our case study, which is a dairy farm pictured here in Pennsylvania, where an anaerobic digestion system is a new entrepreneurial unit that's allowing the next generation of the farm to improve their circularity, the circularity of the whole farm business really, and expand the portfolio of revenue streams. So Pennsylvania is in the rain-fed part of the United States. We receive a lot of rain and it's getting wetter. This map shows annual average precipitation over the last 30 years compared to the 20th century. And we also produce a lot of manure, and therefore we have a lot of nutrients that we can input into our cropping systems. But this also leads to water quality problems across our state and downstream in the Chesapeake Bay, where our water drains, and the Chesapeake Bay is impaired for nutrient pollution. The schematic shows you how most Pennsylvania dairies operate. Farms bring in fossil energy, feed largely imported from the Midwest, synthetic fertilizers, herbicides, and other chemicals into the system. And they bring those inputs in to produce livestock. They also grow other forages on the farm for the livestock. Ultimately, the farm produces milk, and through the supply chain, other dairy products for human consumption, generates revenue, not necessarily profits. And some farms also produce corn for ethanol. And then the system includes these large downstream waste streams, like food waste and packaging, and they largely emit carbon to the atmosphere. And on some farms where the system lacks efficiency, they export nutrients to water, contributing to those downstream water quality problems we just talked about. And I guess just as an example, so like some farms will apply livestock manure regardless of spatial variability, and they don't use these precision ag technologies. So many of our farms do now. So long story short, like we've seen throughout this series, the system is largely linear. And the case study farm we're talking about today, pictured here, is a little bit different. So the farm is located in Mifflintown, Pennsylvania. This is about an hour southeast of Penn State, where I am today. It's owned by the first generation. They purchased the farm 30 years ago. They started out with about 50 cows and less than 150 acres, and that's pretty typical for dairies in Pennsylvania and other farms. We have a lot of small farms. Today, the three sons manage the farm. They employ about 18 employees annually. They farm 1,300 acres and they support about 1,000 cows. So they've increased substantially in the past few decades. The farm is really centered around two well-managed anaerobic digesters. These have capacities of 500,000 gallons and 1.5 million gallons. And they're fed biomass 6 times a day. And this really creates circularity in their system. This is an aerial photo of one of the digesters on the farm. They capture and digest all the manure from their dairy. So these are their cows pictured here. And then additionally, they bring in about 18,000 tons of food waste. This is a photo of a pile of food waste they received. And just to put that number into perspective, each day in the United States, approximately 1 pound of food per person is wasted. So they're bringing in about 100,000 people's food waste annually. And similar to a landfill, they are paid a tipping fee for accepting waste. This is bringing in a new revenue stream. And that food waste comes into the facility packaged. So you can see that here. It's actually in cardboard boxes, cans, bags, plastic. They bring in a lot of packaging. And they remove and recycle the cardboard. And then the rest of the material, which is kind of fun, goes into a depackager. So you can see one of the farmers here standing next to the depackager. Here's another picture of it, but it grinds the food waste while removing packaging materials. So anything that's recycled is recycled, and then the food is separated and you can put it into the digester. And I think the food waste piece of this operation, this is just another photo inside their building, might be the most interesting part of the story for the circular economy. So the farm, their cows produce on average about 1,000 megagrams of milk every year. And then that gets transported off farm, sold to consumers. Even if 1/3 of the milk that they produce on the farm, the typical estimate of food waste used by the Food and Agricultural Organization, even if 1/3 of that was wasted downstream, it's still less than 3% of the food waste they're bringing into their system and recycling into valuable products. The food waste and the cow manure are combined in their system in a mixing area before being pumped into the two digesters via the piston pumps that you see here. Then the digester produces biogas, like we talked about. So they scrub it to reduce hydrogen sulfide concentrations, and then they use that biogas for combined heat and power. So this is a photo of their combined heat and power engine. The recovered heat that they're producing is actually used on farm for various activities. They use it to heat the digester, which is really important because the digester needs to stay hot to keep working, to keep that biological system happy. They also heat water in their dairy barns. They dry their corn grain, they pasteurize their milk, they heat their shop, their house. So all of that heat is actually being captured and used. And then they also take biogas and they convert it into electricity, which is sold to the regional electric grid. And when we talk about efficiency and circularity, I think this is really interesting and a really good example of how other farms could be in the region. So this farm is completely self-sufficient in meeting all of its energy needs. So they have a net zero energy bill monthly. With the food waste and manure that they produce on farm and that they bring into the system, they're able to meet all of their energy needs. And then the leftover liquid and solid digestate on the farm gets separated into its liquid and solid parts, and they use a screw press to do that. You can see that here. And then they take that liquid fraction and they use it to fertilize the farm's 1,300 acres. I think this is another really good example of circularity in the system. They grow corn grain and corn silage under no-till management. They also double crop with winter rye in the winter, which may be less common in the Midwestern United States, but is actually more common in the Northeast to have cover and double crops. And then they take that rye and feed it to their cows. They also manage the fields for perennial cool season grasses for hay. And I think one of the things that is really fun is most notably the farm recently planted 10 acres of switchgrass, which is a perennial warm season grass, as part of a collaboration with a grant with Penn State and Iowa State. And when that grass reaches maturity in a couple of years or so, they plan to add that feedstock to their anaerobic digestion system too. So they'll be co-digesting food waste, manure, and grasses in order to produce biogas. And in terms of the liquid digestate, the farm is almost completely self-sufficient in nitrogen fertilizer. So they side dress with synthetic nitrogen fertilizer occasionally. Hopefully one day they won't do any of that, but their digestate concentration is higher in ammonium than their manure before digestion. So they have this liquid nitrogen fertilizer that has more N that's readily available to plants, or N that's more readily available to plants, I should say. We're not producing more material than we have coming in. And they also land apply by spray application currently, but they are involved in a manure injection trial. So that might help their farm in the future reduce some of those emissions and nutrient losses. They follow a nutrient management plan. So this helps with reducing those nitrogen and phosphorus losses and runoff and to help protect local water quality. And that's really important in Pennsylvania. So we have regulatory mandates with the US EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, and our state in order to implement best management practices to improve water quality. And these are huge efforts that farmers and other stakeholders are undergoing to reduce nutrient and sediment loading to the Chesapeake Bay, which has been impaired for decades. And, you know, we also have these beautiful native brook trout, like the one that I caught last week, not too far north of the case study farm that we want to protect. And so there's a lot of incentive here to really do things on farms that will keep the nutrients where we want them, helping grow our food system, our crops for our food system. Now, the solid portion of the digestate is recycled for livestock bedding. So they're not bringing in any additional material for their bedding. They're just using what they produce on farm from waste. And all in all, this is really a good example, I think, of a circular economy for a Pennsylvania dairy farm. It's due in large part to the engineered system, the digesters. And I think that's a really important point. When we looked at this farm in detail in terms of the mass balances and what's happening on the farm, without considering emissions from the crop production machinery, we found that the carbon entering the case study farm is higher than the carbon leaving the case study farm. And, you know, annual crops and double crop residues and perennial crop below ground biomass and leaf litter really have contributed annually to the farm's terrestrial carbon storage via photosynthesis. And that's helping regenerate the natural ecosystem's function and draw down carbon from the atmosphere. But you know, what we found is that though terrestrial carbon storage is an important piece of soil health on the farm and crop productivity and climate resilience and on, we found less than 6% of the carbon brought into the system is stored in the soil. So this really emphasizes the importance of the engineered system, which is offsetting emissions as a greenhouse gas strategy. So this case study is just one of a few examples in our state right now, but the potential for these systems to help in a larger circular economy is actually greater. So this graph is from work that we did with Sonorpe Asenheibel at Penn State. So we conducted a statewide assessment of current biomass that would be available to feed into anaerobic digesters across the state for a renewable natural gas circular economy, like livestock manure, crop residues. Those are feedstocks we currently have. And then we also looked at, based on estimates of crop profitability and land profitability, where we could add winter double crops, land that doesn't have those already, and where we could convert unprofitable annual cropland into perennial crops that could be fed into digesters. And what we found from this assessment is that there may be a potential to replace up to 10% of the fossil natural gas in the state with renewable natural gas. So you can see here, we looked at landfill waste and wastewater treatment plants, the WWTT that you see in yellow, and livestock manure, but the crops are really the bigger piece of the puzzle here in terms of the opportunity for feedstocks in these systems to help. So this map shows the county level results for renewable natural gas production and the co-produced carbon dioxide. And recall back to our earlier flow chart that when we make renewable natural gas, we can separate the methane and the carbon dioxide components of the biogas. And this is where that potential for negative emissions, something that was discussed in the series last week, that potential from these engineered systems could really come into play. And that's the third point we discussed earlier of how renewable natural gas could reduce greenhouse gas emissions. This is more of a future opportunity, but we could capture and sequester that CO2 stream that's produced in the biogas, and we could store it in underground geologic reservoirs. So again, this isn't circular. We're not keeping carbon in the economy, but we're moving it and storing it. And that's great for ensuring climate resilience, which is still part of this idea of the circular economy. And as part of the statewide assessment, we estimated in total that there's more than 2 billion tons of carbon that could be captured and stored in the state annually. So we're in Appalachia. It's estimated there's geologic potential to store hundreds of years worth of carbon emissions at present rates. And developing this would have to be done safely, in addition to other technological requirements, and to really capture this opportunity to reduce carbon emissions and get human and economic benefits. But there's potential there, and you can see in this graph, you can see in this graph that a lot of that potential is in the southeastern part of the state. So there's an opportunity for more example farms like the one we shared today, this one case study, and more engineered systems in Pennsylvania and elsewhere that really take food and agricultural waste and recycle those materials in their system. And in doing so, regenerate soil through practices like land application of anaerobic digestion, digestate, provide economic benefits, like in rural communities like our case study farm who no longer have an electric bill. There's also this opportunity to offset emissions like the methane emission that would otherwise be emitted in the manure and the food waste, and reduce greenhouse gas emissions to ensure that climate resilience. And so this effort is the work of many contributors. And I hope you found the short case study we shared today interesting, and you're as excited as I am to see how our professional society can implement more projects like this on the ground. Chuck said at the beginning of this, the devil is in the details. And so I'm excited to see more examples that take these big concepts that we're talking about, how we can radically improve our food and agricultural systems and implement them on real farms across the United States and the world. So thanks to all the contributors of this work and for your time today. And I think it's always good to end on a fish. So with that, I'd love to hear your comments and try to answer any questions you have. I know this was a little short. We tried to stick to 20 to 30 minutes, but I think my colleagues Siobhan Patel and Tom Richard may also be on the line, and we'd love to have a conversation about this, and they can chime in too. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Steph. We do have a few questions that came through in the chat. I'll read those your way and let you respond. And I don't know if some others maybe also want to chime in. I know Tom and Siobhan might have something there as well. So the first one, some of these steps seem very labor intensive. Is there any sort of subsidizing by unpaid family labor?
Yeah, so the family is actually working on the farm. This is their job, their livelihood. So I wouldn't say that it's necessarily subsidized family labor, but the revenue that they are receiving is supporting them. It's their full-time job. Yeah, I see another question here. It says, what happens with the livestock bedding after use? So it's recycled again into the digester. So more circularity in the system here. They're pretty innovative. I think so, at least. I also see this question, how, sorry, Chuck.
Keep going, you're doing great. Yeah.
I see the question tacking on to the question about the subsidized by unpaid family labor, how scalable or contagious it can be. Yeah, so that's a great question. And there are a few other farms in Pennsylvania that are doing similar things, you know, bringing in food waste or using their manure to produce biogas. One of the farmers on this farm actually went and saw one of the other farms before kind of heading down this path. So I think it's scalable and contagious, but it's taking time. So we have a lot of small dairies that are rapidly going out of business, that are losing money year after year. And so there might be a need to kind of consolidate these farms and like bring them together, maybe have community digesters or other programs that can support small farms that are excited about this, and maybe the idea is a little contagious, but they don't have the capital to invest in a digester, or they're just not sure about it, or maybe they don't have the technical capacity. So on this farm, the son that's managing the digester is really excited about the system. He has educated himself very well about the system. He is, taking care of it like a baby. He knows what he's doing, and that took years to get there. So for farmers that are interested in just like dabbling in it, even if the idea is contagious, I don't think that's really realistic. So you can't just jump into this. It's a big investment. And so that's why there might be a need to have more community shared systems. Does that answer your question?
I actually have one that, if we could, well, it's kind of all relates, right? So there's one here about the capital investment. I think you kind of answered that, except maybe how did they make that first capital investment? Was it through a grant, or was it they just, what was that like for them?
Yeah, so there are actually grants available right now in Pennsylvania, and I think that is what has driven a lot of the infrastructure so far. Yes. So it's hard. Again, these are really large investments. We're talking about millions of dollars. And so right now, absolutely, the system needs to be a little bit subsidized. This farm received a grant from the Natural Resources and Conservation Service and a Commonwealth Financing Authority grant. So those were the two to kind of get started. And they paid for about half the cost. So right now, that's kind of how things are. In the future, maybe that'll change, but right now, really, you need some incentive from grants and other government programs to support it.
There's an additional part to that question. Has the system evolved, or was it originally built with all the separate components?
Yeah, that's a great question. It has evolved over time. Actually, they added the second digester, I think just a few years ago, but it's changed over time. So it was kind of a stepwise process. I think if Siobhan's on, she can probably share the timeline better than I can. But she's on, she's popping on. But it's definitely been a stepwise process. And I think they'll keep changing, knowing the main manager of the system, the farmer. He's pretty innovative and excited, and I think he's going to keep trying to push the envelope and make their system better. Siobhan, do you have anything to add?
No, I'd agree with what you're saying. They did start with an initial digester and found that it way undersized for their capacity. So they were very interested in adding a second. They started the process in about 2017, and that's been online for a couple of years now, since 2019. So yeah, they're definitely the type that want a zero waste operation and work hard to achieve that.
That answer kind of rolls into this question: is the system robust enough to absorb changes in the dairy stock, plus or minus 100 heads? And that's a great question. Right now, they're actually not operating at full capacity, so they could bring in some more cattle. I don't know what the plus or minus is that they're able to add at this point in time. But like Siobhan said, they added a digester at one point. And I think if they continued to grow, or if they became like a community digester for other farms to feed into, then I think that they would think about adding more capacity. Okay, let's see. Oh, there's a question here about carbon storage. So they said 2.7 gigatons of CO2 is substantial. Is that the amount of storage available, or the amount that can be generated from anaerobic digestion? And I think if you're talking about my slide 63, that's the total potential in our state. So we looked at what is the potential in our geologic reserves. Let's see. Oh, this is a great question. So this person asked, I'm curious if the farmers considered other options for the biogas other than combined heat and power, CHP. Can you comment on the challenges for farmers to upgrade and tap into renewable natural gas pipelines in Pennsylvania? This is a huge challenge. So it is, we don't have natural gas everywhere in our state. As part of that statewide assessment that I shared with you, the woman I mentioned, Sonorte, has been working on this optimization model with Dan Sanchez's group in California, kind of looking at like where we could site digesters and, how would we move the product around? Would we have virtual pipelines? Would we inject it into existing pipelines? And in doing so, we were looking at maps of existing pipelines in Pennsylvania, and we saw where we are, there's like no natural gas. And some of the people that were working on our team were really surprised by that. And Tom Richard, who I work with, said, Steph, what about your farm? Do you have renewable natural gas there? And I said, no, absolutely not. We grew up burning wood because we didn't have access to that. So there is this limitation that we don't have pipelines everywhere, but there is this concept of virtual pipelines. We don't have to move it in actual pipelines. We can move it with trucks. But it is expensive to tap into renewable natural gas pipelines right now if you don't have that infrastructure in place. So there is a landfill in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, and I think they spent several $1 million in order to get access to the pipeline, but now they are producing renewable natural gas from landfill gas. So Brahm asked, what is the source of food waste and how is it collected and delivered? So that's a good question. I think that they bring in food waste from a 70-mile radius around their facility, and it gets trucked in, and it's delivered in the packaging that it comes in. So that's why they have to have that depackager, because it's being delivered with plastic or inside cardboard or other things like that. And the food waste, they are receiving things. I mean, we showed like produce, but they're also receiving like milk, I think, Siobhan, and also dog food. So that's kind of fun. And I know they have capacity. So I'm not sure how aggressively the farmer has been looking for more food waste options, but that's certainly like a big part of the revenue side of this, because they get paid a tipping fee to accept that waste, much like a landfill would. Oh, and then the other question, the next question kind of goes with this. It says, are there food waste generators nearby within 25 miles? So I would say yes, within 70 miles. I don't know how many are within 25 miles, but I know most of it's coming from, or all of it's coming from within 70 miles. Oh, okay. We also just want to mention, so the farm's income, this is important. So they have no other income outside of the electricity that they're generating and the tipping fees, and the tipping fees add up. So that's really what's kind of supporting this family. Chat. Okay, so here's a good question. Who designs or implements these types of systems? And who could we go to if we wanted to pursue such design on a farm? You talked about a few grant sources, but is there a listing of places providing grants for these systems? That's a great question. Siobhan, do you know who designed this farm digester by chance? I don't remember.
So often, at least in Pennsylvania, you work with the folks that do the generator. So in this case, Martin Energy worked with them. They're the folks that do the actual generation, and they design the system for the farm. Some have more of a Frankenstein version where they're doing parts themselves and then getting their gen set. But primarily, we see folks work with the generation companies.
Thanks. Great answer. And then they're asking about a few other grant sources. Is there a listing? So I don't know the listing exactly, but there are several different options available that are federal programs and that are also state funded programs. So I have a list here I can pull up. I think I had that earlier. Yeah, so in Pennsylvania, we have Penvest, actually this is a big one. So the Pennsylvania Investment Fund, they invest in best management practices across the state. So things like digesters, but also things like riparian buffers, which you can harvest crops from sometimes and earn income from, and those can help improve water quality. So that's a big investment fund in Pennsylvania. Farmers often use REAP, the Rural Energy for America program. That's through the United States Department of Agriculture. There's also, I think it's CFA, yeah, the Commonwealth Financing Authority, Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and they help finance digesters. So certainly, like, in order to have a digester, like I said earlier, you really need help financing the upfront costs because they're substantial. And so it's not just this easy thing that the normal farm can just go and implement and buy and, you know, pay Martin Energy or someone to design and put in. It's really needed that we have these state and federal financing options right now to help cover those substantial upfront costs. I don't know if there's a listing of places that provide grants, but I do know that those are some of the places in our state. There's another question in the chat: is consolidation of dairy farms continuing in Pennsylvania? And yeah, dairy farms continue to go out of business in Pennsylvania. It's, you know, a reality of the markets. So we have a declining dairy industry because of the food system we operate in and what people are eating and what consumers are buying. So yes, dairy farms are certainly continuing to decline. Milk production is actually still increasing because of advances in technology and feed management and supplement management. So there's kind of like a balance here in that maybe manure production is staying kind of constant as milk production increases, even though our livestock are decreasing. There's another question here about CO2 sequestration. So have you made a presentation on the assessment of CO2 sequestering in the state? One that might have been recorded. Those few slides on that initiative were interesting, but I would love to hear more about it. You know, Tom Richard, who is on this project with Siobhan and I, may have, and I can find out and let you know, Trevor. But he's presented on this a lot recently. So maybe I have not. And there's another question about food waste. I think we answered this. So, is it coming from grocery stores or processors? So it's coming from a variety. Yeah, Siobhan just said something. A variety of places.
Yeah, I'd say both. I think that's the short answer. The dog food is certainly from the producer, the actual manufacturer, but a lot of it is packaged waste from Sam's Clubs, Aldi's, places like that.
Great, thanks. And then there was a comment in the chat that the electric utility company may offer incentives for combined heat and power systems as well. There are also, I guess, other incentives like the renewable fuel standard. So if farmers are upgrading and producing renewable natural gas, then they can capitalize on those D3 RINs credits, renewable energy credits for renewable natural gas. And they're like 10 times as high as the price of fossil natural gas. So that is driving some of the innovation. I don't see any other questions, Chuck. Do you? Did I miss anything?
No, you did a slam dunk job. I have one though. I was curious about the profitability. And if you look at this farm, not to get into numbers or anything like that, except to ask do you have a feel for what percent of their income is coming from the digestion side of the business versus the milk side of the business?
Yeah, so I think their income is coming from the digestion side of the business, from selling electricity to the grid and from those food waste tipping fees, certainly. Yeah, we don't have the economics in detail to share today. Yeah, just because we're working with the farm.
Yeah, that's understandable. It was just one of those, I was curious if, you know, if you could get like a percentage to get an idea of what's the, where is this farm going? And obviously they've made some very important decisions, and one would assume that they were based at least partially on finances. So.
Yeah, absolutely. This digester is allowing their farm business to continue and grow. Otherwise, I think it would have been out of business. You know, potentially, not necessarily, well, I shouldn't say that, but potentially because of the declining dairy industry that we're seeing. So this is certainly an example of a system that's really helping this dairy farm sustain itself and also grow so the next generation can also support itself. So remember, you know, we have the first generation, the grandparents who own the farm, and then the sons are taking over and they're living off it, and they employ 18 people. So
Awesome. And one more question. There was, how long is the payback period for their system? It's an open question. Maybe you don't have that answer, but
I don't have that answer. That's a great question. And I wish Tom was on, because he could probably rattle that off on the top of his head, but I don't know actually what the payback period is on the system. Right now, they're doing well, and they've been operating this for 10 years, I guess.
very good. Well, if there are no other questions, I did see a few notes in here that this would make a good resource article, and I think we can probably follow up on that at ASAB headquarters. But if there's no other questions, I guess I'd want to thank everybody for participating today. A lot of good questions, a lot of good discussion. Special thanks to Steph for her presentation, as well as everybody else that she'd already recognized as well. And then also want to thank a few of the other folks that helped make this a reality. I saw Bram was on, Jasper certainly here as well. I'm sure there's others that are either on and others behind the scenes that have made it happen. So as I mentioned at the open, this is the fourth in what started as a 5-part series on circular systems. So our next installment is going to be on November 9th. So I think that's about 2 weeks away at noon Eastern time. So it's Tuesday, November 9th. And we'll be talking about standards to support our transition to circular systems. And as I kind of alluded to, we are working on extending this series through the end of the year with a few speakers in December. We're still ironing out a few details, but be on the lookout for an email from ASAB calling out for a series encore to continue what we've all been enjoying so far. So thanks again, Steph, and really appreciate everybody calling in today.